Text you. You're on block one. Block one.
Yeah.
Chili day today.
I'm good. Okay, great. Yeah, that's right. We are.
Doug, have you signed up yet?
Yeah, but I would.
So here's the back. We're trying to finally introduce you to Bill. They'll stick around for
Hey, their camera members. When Derek Wood calls you, you always support it, right?
Okay.
Good morning.
I don't know why Guzman.
Good morning, everyone. County Cities and Towns Subcommittee number 1 is now in order. We have quite a few bills this morning. And we're going to move out pretty sharply. This is our last meeting of the subcommittee, and Friday morning will be the last meeting of the full committee. We'll start, I'm going to do some bills maybe a little differently this morning to accommodate us getting through. Take them in 2 blocks. Those that will require more discussion in the second block, the first block will move right out. Delegate Wiltz, HB 2450. I have a request from the paper to strike the bill.
Move strike.
Move from the second strike. Voice vote. Okay, those in favor of the motion, aye?
No, it's not.
Aye.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I was trying to get it. It is recorded.
It is recorded, but we'll do that again. Electronic board. Okay, strike from the dock. Okay, now, we have 4 bills that, to my knowledge, that there has been no opposition to. Delegate Torium's Bill 2670, Delegate Edmonds 2807, Tyler 2808, and Landis 2809. Anybody on the subcommittee that has an issue with any of these? Anybody in the audience that's here to speak against these 4 bills? Okay. Can we do a block? Okay, so we're going to take them quickly individually then. House Bill 2670. Delegate Torian, we have a motion and a second to report. Board.
Hey, I woke up early for this.
Yeah, very well. Bill, 8-0 to report. Thanks, Bill. You want to-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No worries, no worries.
U.S. testimony for
Dr. Edmonds, your official vote will report 8-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Way to
Dr.
start the day.
Tyler, House Bill 2808. Motion and second to report the bill. We'll vote on the board. Bill reports 8-0. Thank you, Delegate Tyler. Delegate Landis, Taylor Burgess, name in the charter. Motion? Have a motion to report, second. Vote on the board on House Bill 2809. Delegate Landis, your bill reports 8-0. Thank you, sir. Delegate LaRock. I'd just like you to explain your amendment.
That'd be a good thing.
Opposition to the bill, but you do have a substitute.
They do?
I do. Press the wrong button on two different, very similar drafts. The substitute before you, I think, is much less ambitious, we'll say, and hopefully you'll find acceptable.
Could you explain it, please?
Will do. Mr. Chairman, it was brought to my attention that although most towns, counties that develop ordinances, very often, I guess it would be a meeting of those bodies publish those ordinances, but not all do. That puts someone in a position, put my constituent in a position that they were being informed of an ordinance that had been passed years ago, was not available in any printed material or online, and that's a very awkward position to be in. On further inquiry, realized that in those examples, the only way to discover an ordinance like that would be to search through potentially years worth of
Right.
minutes to find out what ordinances had been passed. So this doesn't impose any additional responsibilities on different governments to publish ordinances, but what it does say, and I'm going to line 16 now, where we propose adding any person who is the subject of an action brought by a locality for violation of an ordinance shall be entitled to assert as an affirmative defense that the ordinance was not codified and therefore not accessible to the public to provide adequate notice of the content of the ordinance. And would be helpful, I could read from the Cornell law.
I think you've described it okay. Does any member of the committee have any questions or concerns? Delegate Heritage?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, the phrasing is odd to me as an attorney. It says, it's an affirmative defense that the ordinance was not codified. That to me is sort of a contradiction. If it's an ordinance, then by definition it was codified. The question to my mind is whether it's accessible. I don't understand the phrasing, I guess.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's a misunderstanding about the phrasing codified. It was passed through the normal
Right.
procedures, but it wasn't bound in the way that our Code of Virginia is codified.
Exactly.
It's more like the Acts of Assembly, where you might have to search through 20 years of old Acts of Assembly to find an act of the General Assembly, because it's not codified in the Code of Virginia. It'd be that, a similar situation.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Austin?
what defense does this give that individual, Delegate?
Mr. Chairman, if I may read from the Cornell Law School definition of affirmative defense. Affirmative defense, this is a defense in which the defendant introduces evidence which, if found to be credible, will negate criminal liability or civil liability, even if it is proven that the defendant committed the alleged act. To take the practical application of that idea, so there's an ordinance passed in 19, something that said that you couldn't hang a clothesline in your backyard, and it was never codified, that if you were, if there was action taken against that individual, they could come to court and would be allowed to enter into as evidence that they were never notified by code, published code, and that would, could be or would be accepted as a defense against the alleged
Would
violation.
you see this creating a lot of litigation in localities for any appeal in an ordinance?
No, actually, I think it would probably eliminate potentially litigation, because this would be interpreted clearly by local governments. They would realize that if they don't publish their ordinances, that they're not enforceable.
Is this retroactive?
I'm sorry?
Are you making this retroactive? Is this from this point forward, or are you?
I think the effect would be the same. The retroactive perhaps would only affect maybe a court case that was already in motion, but the idea is really to go forward with this.
My understanding of the law is that, we're ignorance of law is no excuse. And once properly advertised, public hearings conducted on a proposed ordinance, and the Board of Supervisors or County Council votes on the ordinance, and it's contained within the minutes of the body's meeting, that's considered historically to have been fair notice, fair warning to someone. Are we changing the law here by doing that?
I think everything you said is true. This would change the law in the sense that would give the judge the opportunity to hear that defense. The judge wouldn't, in my opinion, wouldn't be bound by this. The judge wouldn't be required to say, well, you're correct, it's not codified, therefore. But I think it would be something the judge could consider in reaching the rule.
Follow
Oh,
it.
sorry, Campbell.
Is that not something the judge can consider anyway, if the defense, with respect to the hearing?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a valid ordinance, even though it was never codified. It's, as you say, it's a valid ordinance.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Bell?
I guess, I think it's for the patron. My question is really to make sure I'm understanding, if they haven't, either they haven't posted online or they haven't printed it in a, as you says, it says that already in the code, criminally bound or loosely form. So basically this would not be accessible. So they couldn't come in and read from a hard copy, or they couldn't access it online. Is that what you're saying?
The answer, I think, is yes. Well, the only way to discover an ordinance like this, if it was not published as described, would be to access minutes of the meeting, which would mean perhaps digging through volumes of, or years worth of minutes of meetings to discover an ordinance that had been passed and not published.
Very well. Is there anyone in the audience care to speak to the bill? Will be the pleasure to submit.
Move report.
So motion. Second to report the bill. Vote on the electronic report. Looks like something to help resolve old cases here. Dr. Ross, your bill will report 5-0. You probably ought to be in the board meeting too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Excuse me. Very well. That concludes block 1. We'll move to block 2, House Bill 1907. Delegate Van Houten.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this House bill, the local check register bill, that would require every locality and school division located in the locality to post on their website, register of all funds expended, showing the vendor name, date of payment, amount, and a brief description of the type of expense. There's amendments, actually. So should move the amendments.
I have line amendments. Mr. Chairman, line 19, after the citation 2.2-3700 sec, insert comma or as otherwise specifically provided by law, comma. and also on line 19, after the word payments, strike the word and. And on line 20, after officers, insert new clause reading and for. Any information related to a settlement or contract that contains a confidentiality clause.
Yeah.
I'll move
Well,
to
this is a substitute.
Yeah,
This is
line
line
amendments.
amendment.
I'll move line.
Move line
Second.
amendment.
Second.
Second, those in favor, aye. Okay, the bill is before us as amended.
So those amendments take into some of the concerns of localities, to exclude things that would fall under what was just stated. It also, the bill is molded so that it's only for populations over a certain size. So every locality with a population greater than 25,000 or school division greater than 5,000. And this bill is a transparency bill, an accountability bill, so that people, the public, can see this information. This information is already, they can already access, right? They can already go and find this information through FOIA. So it would make it easier for them. It's important to note that some localities already do this. Richmond City Public Schools did this. It did not cost them any money to do this. And the last thing I'll say, open up for questions, is that there's a delayed enactment clause so that localities could plan on how to do this, and that date is July 1st, 2020.
You have a fiscal impact statement on this? Do you have any questions? Yep, got a fiscal impact. Okay, Dr. Osmond.
I've had concerns from my school divisions that this is very problematic and time consuming to disseminate this information and publicize it, and it's available by request now. So I really see no benefit of this information. For every division, 25,000 less seems to be a little bit of a far overreach.
Just to clarify, that 25,000 or less wouldn't need to report.
Right, I meant to say it conversion. No problem.
Great. Dr. Thomas.
Last year, we had testimony from, there was one county, I think it was Hanover and Henrico, I can't remember which one, that had this online, and they showed the statistics of who was actually accessing it, and it was like nobody from Virginia. There was a lot from foreign countries just pinging the website. So now we know that another division has done it. Do you have any data to show that citizens are actually using that online register in Richmond?
No, I don't. My response to that would be that how many people use it, it's more citizens use it, they feel like they need it. I don't think that the quantity, I don't think the quantity of who is looking at it should dictate the fact that we should have it available.
Dr. Thomas.
So when you're trying to get a return on investment for something, in my school division, it would take one full-time person to sit there and sift through every one of these records that came through it. So it's not an automated process. You have to look at every record, and there's a cost associated with that. So if you have a fully burdened employee cost of $120,000 and 3 people access it every year, to me there is some sort of trade-off you have to take into account.
Yes. Other questions of the patron? Are there those in the audience that care to speak to the bill? Yes, sir. If you come forward and identify yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Joe Lurch with Virginia Association of Counties. We think that there's a better way to get transparency for the state, for localities. I've mentioned this before when this bill has come up before. The state of Ohio has a program run through the state treasurer called Ohio Checkbook. It's voluntary for all the localities and school divisions and service districts. It's one open access software. You can actually get it online with an app. I can show you. I think Virginia could actually do this better, and I think what would be a better way to go forward is maybe have the auditor of public accounts do a deep dive to say, okay, how could we have one open access system statewide? I do get the delegates, intention to make transparency, and I think we could make it even better. Rather than go to 324 different websites to try to find this, go to one website centrally located at the state. You could have the state accounts, you could have the locality accounts, and we could make it work. So, we are opposed to the bill, but we think the concept has merit, and we think it could be done in a way that benefits all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Townsend Superintendent's Association. We do think this is an unfunded mandate. I am concerned about localities. I was superintendent in a small rural locality
the finance department was 2 people and myself. And so if I were to have to do this, I would probably have had to add another person to do exactly what the delegate talked about to go through. I've got a list of here of counties that would be right around the 5,000, that their LCI is 3 or less. And so this will be a burden on them. These counties are already struggling. So we would ask that you oppose the bill.
So, question? I don't want you to read that list, about how many names are on it?
The ones I just picked out, probably 15 or 20. These are just ones that I picked out.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Stacy Haney on behalf of the Virginia School Board Association. We're also opposed to the bill. As Dr. Smith mentioned, this would be a significant unfunded mandate, particularly for some of our smaller rural school divisions that have been really impacted by the support staff cap that the General Assembly implemented during the recession and has never removed. And so we're very limited on the amount of support staff that we have. And they're already very busy with other important student service related tasks. And so adding this would really require a lot of our small school divisions to hire another person to do this, and it would be funded solely by the localities. And so we
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Next.
oppose the legislation.
Michelle Gowdy, Virginia Municipal League. For all those reasons, but in addition, I want to mention that we have many localities that have certain types of checkbooks out there that still wouldn't comply with this code section because of the way the credit card thing is, particularly the description of expenses on a credit card. That's extremely time consuming. I think Delegate Austin pointed out, probably would cost an unfunded mandate for staff.
Thank you. Next, do you have something different?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I'm sorry for being late, and can I speak?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm with the Coalition for Open Government. My name is Megan Ryan. And I just wanted to let you know, so this is Goochland County. If you go to goochlandcounty.va, you'll see that they have 2 pages, landing pages for their county and for their school district. And if you click on one of those, the check register data, credit card, you'll get this list. This is the list of Excel spreadsheets that the school district has put up for the past year. And if you click on one of those links, you'll get this. This is 8 pages of really dense data that says the vendor number, the payee, the invoice amount description, check number, check date, net amount, and description again. So this is what's required of this statute. It would be great if we had all these great interactive web, dashboards that put this together in a really fancy package, but this is all that's required. This is all that's required, and so we would urge you to give this amount of transparency to the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Michael Malloy, Fairfax County Schools. We're kind of the flip side of the small school division argument. We do hundreds of thousands of transactions in a year. To magnify the workload for a small school division to be able to go through all those transactions to make sure that things that were sensitive or that were exempted off of this list were not personally or were not posted, it would be an unfunded mandate.
Thank you, sir. Is that it? Well, we operate by motion.
Chairman, I move money bill on the table.
You have a motion to lay the bill on the table? Second. Thank you, sir. Getting up so early. Adams?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. This is House Bill 2061. The city of Richmond is requesting to be included as a locality under Virginia Code 15.2-1408, which allows certain localities to adopt ordinances restricting lobbying. This request is in response to widespread public distrust and the recommendation of the city's Ethics Reform Task Force of 2017 and seeks to ensure increased level of accountability, public confidence, and public trust. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, delegates Austin, Campbell, and Thomas all serve in areas included in this code, commonly referred to as the revolving door provision. Richmond seeks to add language that adds this city on par with the current state practice designed to increase political and legislative transparency and trust. Specifically, The language adds to the code that the city of Richmond, the governing body, by ordinance, may prohibit former officers or employees for 1 year after their term of office has ended or their employment has ceased from representing a client or acting as a representative that would in any way engage in city government ordinances or contracts, proceedings, or lobbying in any way for that immediate post 1 year time.
Yes, ma'am. Questions of the patron from the subcommittee? Is there anyone in the audience who care to speak for or against the bill? Is there a motion?
Move forward.
Second.
Motion and second to report. We'll vote on the report. Elder Adams, bills voted to report 8-0.
Appreciate your time.
Probably just don't need to be at the 8 o'clock meeting on Friday.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We'll call you if we decide to seal the bill. Delegate Aaron, you have 2 bills. We'll start with 2002.
Thank you.
Does that suit you?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, before you is House Bill 2002, which is brought to you at the request of the City of Hopewell. The bill would amend their existing charter by changing their selection of mayor to appointment instead of election. And merely, this is just updating antiquated language to reflect their current practice. So I hope it will be the will of the committee to move this forward. And should you need additional information, I do have a representative here with the City of Hopewell.
Yes, ma'am. Questions of the patron? I have one. You're carrying this bill at the request of the governing body, correct?
That's correct.
And so there was a vote taken to ask you to do that?
That's correct.
And what was that vote?
I don't have the exact count, but I'm sure Mr. Bragg could provide it.
It's 4-2.
4-2. You want to come forward?
Yes, sir. You want him to speak too?
Well, if you have additional
I have that
questions, I'd
question,
like to.
yes, sir.
The vote was 4-2.
Would you tell us? 4-3?
4-2.
4-2?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
For
very
the
good.
governing body.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, follow-up question. Follow-up
Follow-up
question.
question, sir?
Why was there 2 dissenting votes on this request to make this change?
They just didn't agree with it.
Okay. Well, from election to appointment. Okay.
You're welcome. Anyone in the audience care to speak? Either way? So a motion and a second to report. Delegate Eric, your bill will report 7-1.
Thank you.
Thank you. That one. Next.
Okay, before you now, at this time, is House Bill 2076. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a line amendment before I begin discussing the bill.
Yes, ma'am.
On line 33, you will see it states the city manager shall serve as a collector of city taxes. I would like to make that a may.
Okay.
I would like to change shall from may.
I'll bring the line in.
Second.
Motion is second to move the line amendment. Those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This line amendment would bring the bill into the same language that just passed the Senate yesterday. Ultimately, House Bill 2076 is also before you as a request of the city of Petersburg, and it is also a charter change. The bill proposes to amend Petersburg's local charter to provide the city manager for the city of Petersburg to serve as city collector of taxes and transfer certain duties from the treasurer's office. The intent of this bill is to consolidate some of the core financial functions from the treasurer's office under the city manager. And I would like to also just share that the line amendment that you all have just agreed to is on behalf of both the city manager and the treasurer's office coming together while the bill is being heard on the Senate side and sort of agreeing to these terms. And this change would allow the flexibility to remain with the city to go between both options should that become necessary. And I do have both I have the treasurer here as well as the city manager, should the committee have specific questions about this.
Yes, members of Freddie?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Austin?
I don't know a lot of the history, but it seems kind of odd to me that we would be taking the authority away from the treasurer and giving some authority to a city manager to collect. Can you expand on that a little bit, Delegate?
I would invite the city manager to
Thank
come
you.
and address your question.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. Mrs. Aretha Farrell Benavides is the city manager in Petersburg.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Morning.
This was created actually prior, I've only been with the city for about a year and a half. The city of Petersburg created a collector of taxes, probably at least 10 or 15 years ago. One of the things that occurred is the city council has the ability to appoint a collector of taxes, which already exists. The key was when we started this process and they were looking at the financial restructuring for the city, they were debating on, do you create another layer of management structure, or do you in fact just appoint the city manager as the collector of taxes, and then the duties of the collector of taxes can be then delegated to my chief operating officer and my finance team. And so the collector of taxes already exists, and the goal was, initially was saying that it had to be the city manager. We've moved away from it having to be the city manager till it could be the city manager versus that.
So the treasurer is not an elected position?
The treasurer is an elected position, the city manager is an appointed position, so the treasurer will remain. And what we've done is sat down with the treasurer and talked about dividing up the duties. One of the things that we've all observed over time, and I always tell people, I've only been in Virginia for a year and a half, is that as the treasurer's position has grown over time, one of the things that's happened is finances have become more complex. At one time, a check would come in, you would cash the check, you put it in the bank. Now we've moved into other processes, from electronic fund transfers to billing, and it's become more complex. And so what we've agreed to do with my finance team is to work with the treasurer to make sure that we're providing the high level accounting support that he will need to do his job, or whomever the treasurer is. And so we respect the role of the constitutional officer, but we also respect the fact that the constitutional officer will need additional support from our division with people who have the CPAs to do their job. And so that's what we agreed to do.
Very good. Delegate Thomas?
I've been following this for quite some time. I was in local government when the drama came up.
Yes.
And that had the potential to affect all the rest of us because, the General Assembly was a little concerned about that. My question is, I've seen a lot of duties taken away from the elected constitutional officer. So what would be left for the treasurer to do?
Well, the treasurer's still gonna work with us with reconciliation on actually having a one-page sheet to show you the duties of treasurer. You have, it's actually pretty extensive. When we first. So one of the duties, things that we came to conclusion of and realized that most people don't realize the volumes of what's financed in the treasurer. And so when they came up with this process through the transition group from a financial stabilization standpoint, they realized that there's a lot going on. There's a lot behind the scene that happens. And the transition under the Bob group, one of the things that they did was they recommended reestablishing the collective taxes. With the previous treasurer, we had an issue with collections, we had an issue with who was doing what. We also had an issue with checks being cashed and everything, and disappearing. And so what they recommended to us under the Bob group is to look at bringing the collector back to make sure that we were focusing on the revenue. I spend the money and they collect the money. And so that responsibility of the treasurer will still stay. He'll have all of the state duties as assigned and prescribed, but he'll also still be the person who signs the checks.
Other members? Delegate Harrington?
Question for the patron or the city manager, does your treasurer agree with this?
Our treasurer is here.
Stoves.
Mr. Ken Pritchett is our treasurer.
Morning, gentlemen. I've agreed to this division of duties, and basically it was created because of the city council appointing a city collector, and there's so many things that cross over between the collector and the treasurer that with that position being created, it just made it very awkward to do some of the accounting procedures. So we've had our issues transitioning and implementing the collector again, which city hadn't had for, in my best of recollection, 35 to 50 years. So creating the collector did create a lot of extra transitional things between the two departments. So to make peace with the collector and the city manager, I have agreed, and of course, at some point in time, if it doesn't work, when the next treasurer comes on board, they may be right back here to, you know, talk to you again. But right now, I think we come to an agreement and we can work it out.
What is the percentage of delinquent annual accounts in Petersburg? Can you, I know you don't have to get into a lot of detail.
30%.
I'm sorry.
We have a general about a 30% collection rate in Petersburg. That's one of the biggest challenges the city has.
30% delinquency?
Well,
Collection. Okay, so you got 70% delinquency.
we have a 70% collection rate. We are
Okay.
working very actively to move it out, but there were some practices that occurred, which led to the financial stabilization of the city. People stopped paying, and we are constantly working on that. And one of the things the treasurer had brought to our attention is that what we've got to do is hold people responsible. Fiscal responsibility is very important. I made a commitment to come here based on the fact that I believe in local government, but I also believe that we're going to have to structurally change how we do things in the city of Petersburg to be successful.
Dr.
And that is
Campbell?
Thank you for your
Question, ma'am, I heard two different things. Is it that 3 in 10 people are not paying their taxes, or 7 in 10 people are not paying their taxes?
30% do not pay. We were at a
Okay,
36% collection rate when I got here. We are
Okay.
working on it. I think we're getting toward 80%. For instance, it's water bill, property taxes, personal property taxes across the board. Petersburg does not have in my opinion, and I've been doing this for 30 years, does not have a financial problem. It has a collection problem. We have a $100 million budget at a city of 34,000. However, if you're only collecting a portion of it, you then have a problem.
Proper. Follow-up question, are the collections primarily in personal property tax or in real property tax?
It's actually in water bills is my biggest problem. Water bill and for real estate tax, our issue is, you have a lot of folks who've previously deceased. You'll see water bills or bills come up and they're in the names of people who some folks know have been deceased for many years. And I think the treasurer and I were talking about it, he saw some bills come through and it's like, these folks aren't there. So there are some billing issues because we moved into a new system, but it's holding people accountable and having people to be fiscally responsible. We stopped water cutoffs.
Dr. Thomas?
So to be clear, Mr. Pritchard was not the treasurer when all that happened. Just
Right.
correct the record there.
Campaigned
Yeah,
to take
during
care of
to fix it, right.
delinquency and straighten things, but they appointed the collector during my campaign.
Right. I took all the information you gave me very seriously. There's a lot in here. You know, having your staff cut in half, potentially telling you need to move out of the main building. There's a lot of angst going on, and I'm just curious. One simple change from may to shall has everybody back at the table, and you're going to work it out. So, I'm personally not inclined to make this change because I think you have the may from this committee right here, and if you don't work it out next year, then I would be inclined to do the shall next year. So that's where I'm at.
Comment to, you say you've been in Virginia a year and a half. I mean, our constitutional officers and the checks and balances in those systems goes back and has served Virginia well through the centuries and decades. And what we're really, you're doing, bringing this bill is asking the state to interfere in the local situation, unfortunate situation. I'm kind of reluctant too to change our system for that type of thing. And to have, I mean, do you think the city's really given the new treasurer the resources needed to carry out the job under the traditional mode?
Well, I think that if you look back at what already exists in the charter is as he mentioned, over 50 years ago, we created a collector of taxes. Unfortunately, if we don't define the two different roles, it creates more confusion. The treasurer and I may be gone from the city, and what will happen is we'll be back here. And so what we're trying to do is create a future for the city of Petersburg. I am, my husband is a professor in local government, and we both respect what's done. And we've been working with other treasurers to help us to get up to speed and to do the things that need to be done. Our concern now, and my concern chiefly, is the city of Petersburg and how do they stabilize their finances. And I don't see us stabilizing them if you have the ability that people are going back and forth and pointing fingers. We don't want to do that. And the roles, when this was first established, you didn't have a lot of the functions that we list on this sheet now. So it helps us
Mr.
together.
Chairman, thank you. Delegate Bell.
Question, why was the decision made when the city collector position was added to align it under the city manager versus under the treasurer?
50 years ago. I don't know the answer to that.
Delegate Campbell.
Question for treasurer. Were you employed by the treasurer's office before you ran for office, or?
No.
Okay.
I had been on the city council for about 12 years and had seen some of the situation that has developed. And basically, the collector's position being established did take away a lot of staff that would have done the same thing that the collector's doing now. And so it is a crossover situation. We have had the Treasurers Association of Virginia bring to us a very fine treasurer from Wise, Virginia, Dolores Smith, who has volunteered to come in and try to help us get things working smoother, because me being a new treasurer, I'm not a CPA. I ran basically as an administrator to put things, back together that had kind of fallen apart, but obviously I didn't get that opportunity because of the council appointing that position again. And of course, I've mentioned to the city manager and the COO that there's a lot of crossover, and we've got to smooth that out in order to collect. The delinquent taxes are abomination. We're not using DMV stops like we should be. We're not using the state tax refund, I forgot that terminology, to make people pay from their tax returns, their delinquency. So these are things that I've learned, since I've been in office, in just the 1 year. So the 1 year we've been trying to organize, I think, better than we have been with the two separate offices. The offices really need to be a cohesive unit, like it was, but I can live with a collector, and hopefully that the checks and balances are intact, because we will still be doing the deposits and making sure the money is in place.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Bell, I have a question for council coming up. Go ahead.
I would ask if you all would be willing to consider a friendly amendment. And the amendment, I think, would solve a lot of these issues with where we're looking at changing power. If we looked at line 33, where it ends with state law, and we said that the collector would be aligned under the treasurer's office, and then we deleted the next sentence, the city manager shall serve as collector of city taxes, then the collector of city taxes still stays with the treasurer.
It's never been at the treasurer. It's always been an appointment of council. It's already done as an appointment of council, so it's already in law, in state law.
Understand, I would be aligning it there so then you wouldn't have to have the city manager get involved with the collector of taxes, because I think that's the issue.
I understand where you're going. If you'll hold that thought, I'd like to ask council, can the city make the move that is being proposed by this legislation the way the charter is?
The charter does, as stated, already calls for the collector of city taxes, so they already have that authority. The question then comes in, what are the duties of that position, how they relate to the duties of the traditional constitutional officer of the treasurer. And I think under the existing law, there could be conflict over who's performing which duties. I think that's where the issue would come in down the road when there's disagreement between the parties.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might just add for additional context, I would just like to emphasize the fact that since this legislation was introduced, both the treasurer and the city administration have taken a concerted effort to get around the table and work through specifically what the needs of the treasurer's office are, in its current state, and the additional resources and support that's necessary, which is why the language before you is sort of a negotiated agreement to help move the city forward.
Yes, I think that's fair with them standing beside you, but thank you for the comment. Is there anyone else in the audience that just has to speak on this bill? No. Rather than try to rewrite the legislation, I'm concerned that we're really mucking in local affairs that we don't need to muck in at this time. I think they should be able to work it out, but that's just a question. Is there a motion?
Move to report. Second.
Have a motion, a second to report.
Mr. Chairman, can I speak to the motion?
Yes.
I agree we have issues here, and, I was trying to work on the alignment, but I feel where you're coming from. And I think bottom line is this is a desperate measure for a desperate situation. And that's why I would encourage that we consider giving them leeway, because frankly, they've got a really big problem to handle. And, but I get the gravity of what we're talking about.
We really are mucking.
Yeah, I get the gravity of that, but I make a motion with that in mind.
Speaking to the motion, Dr. Austin, there have been over multiple occurrences in years, an underlying movement to eliminate local treasurers and commissioners of revenues. And I am very concerned when we start down that path. Cities are somewhat a little bit different, and I truly think I understand the situation here. And I have sympathy and regard, and I think you're trying to do the right thing, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think we have to be very careful not to set a precedent that we're going to move in that direction and begin to allow that, because I think constitutional officers are held accountable by the people who elect them and put them in office, and there's some desire and intent among localities and counties in particular to eliminate those elected positions. And I have great reservations there. I served 16 years in local government, and I appreciate what they do, and I think we need them as separate entities to the local government to protect the investment of the constituency. So I have a little consternation with this. But I do understand, I think I understand what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it.
Dr. Thomas.
I'll echo those comments. I appreciate your willingness to kind of come in and try to help. And I personally, looking at the situation today, I think you've accomplished the mission just with the introduction of the bill. I think the right people are talking now. So I probably won't support the motion, but I think you've accomplished much for the city.
Very well. The bill is on the floor. Vote on electronic voting board. Delegate Erd, your bill fails to report 4-4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we have Delegate Campbell's bill, which I think we can do in a few minutes, and then we have time for perhaps more discussion on the last bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have with me copies of the estimate of local physical impact that this bill passed around to everyone. And I want to start with this because when I looked at it, I saw where Fairfax County had $72,000 down for this. And it really troubled me, and I got thinking about it, and I thought, well, somebody in Fairfax put down a clerical position to handle this process. But if you read right above it, Virginia Beach, they say it was more or less just add an additional step to their process. And I thought about that, and I think what that means is the bill will come into the city, and the city will transfer to the police department. And the thing that is wrong with my bill is, and I'll admit this, my bill does not take into consideration that larger police agencies and sheriff's departments will have a workman's compensation person on staff. The bill was aimed at your local sheriffs, and a particular sheriff where he had 5 deputies get into a struggle with a suicidal person they were trying to arrest. The man had cut both of his wrists, and the 5 deputies wound up getting covered with blood while they were trying to treat him and take him into protective custody. They went to the hospital for proper procedure and protocol to be checked. The man was known to be a hepatitis C person, and the hospital looked at it and they said 3 of them had the opportunity to be exposed. 2 of them were okay. It's the 2 that were okay was the problem. The bills were submitted to the employees, they turned them into the sheriff's office, they get sent over to the county government. The deputies get notice from the hospital, the bills haven't been paid, they take them back to the sheriff's office, he sends them to the county government. Then they get notices that they are being more or less reported on their credit report because for non-payment of bills, which it's really an aggravating thing more than anything else, because if you had a dedicated person or someone in the county government that was responsible for this, that person would pick up the phone, call the insurance carrier and say, hey, look, y'all are wrong here, you gotta pay for this. So it's kind of a tricky little thing. And what I would offer today is, I think my bill should include some language to the effect that any police or sheriff's department that has a dedicated workman's compensation employee will be exempt from this section. And I think that will take care of Fairfax, Virginia Beach, and agencies that are larger in size and have this.
Questions of the patron? Mr. Chairman, do not all sheriff's departments have workman's comp on their employees?
They have it, but the insurance company refused it like they did. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, this happened to me one time in the state. I got one bill from the hospital telling me that I hadn't paid it. I took it to the first sergeant, he called the captain. The captain called Richmond, and that was the end of it, because the state police have a person that is dedicated to that. But when you get into the local government, it goes over to your director of finance's office, and in lots of cases, they don't know what to do with it. So this is more or less, if it comes into the director of finance's office, somebody's gonna pick it up, take it to him, and he's gonna look at it, and he's gonna know to pick up the phone and call somebody. It's just a breakdown of the process is what we're trying to address.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Would that not then just be an internal training process as opposed to a legislative fix?
It could be, but how do we get them to do it?
Mr. Chairman, I would think that it would just be, as a matter of taking care of their employees, that it would be something that they should and would do once they've been notified that this issue exists. So that's my thought.
I would think, Ronnie, the sheriff would take care of that issue. If he has a deputy who's been injured or has need of the use of workman's comp, which the department has, I mean, why would he not follow up with the county administration and have the? Yeah, I mean.
We've both been in local government, we know.
Right, I agree with David that I don't understand why we need to fix the legislation to tell people, if you're covered as an employee and you have workman's comp on your job, and you're hurt or injured in the line of performing your duties, there's a procedure there by which to cover that. So I don't know that we need legislation to do that, but go ahead.
Those in the audience? Elder Campbell.
Billy Campbell, you know, there are occasions in which an officer, you know, may have a claim against a third party for the injuries incurred, beyond workers' comp. I'm worried what the impact may be on the collateral source rule if, in fact, the bills he doesn't incur the bills, they go directly to the locality. And that's a huge question I have in my mind, and it makes me a little hesitant to move forward at this juncture. Because I certainly don't want to impair his ability to be able to recover from that responsible party.
Okay. Are there those in the audience who care to speak to the bill? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Jones, representing the Virginia Sheriff's Association. The sheriff actually asked this bill to be put in. He's been working with the locality, but the issue between the provider, we had 5 deputies to show up at a scene to effect an arrest. And when they get there, they find that the person has cut both wrists and bleeding profusely. And they go into rescue mode, put tourniquets on them to save them. In the process, they get covered with tainted blood, and they all go and get tested. 5 deputies, and the workers' comp covers 3, it doesn't cover the other 2, and the deputies start getting the bills. And I don't know what the sheriff can do about that. He can tell the provider not to send the bill to the deputy, but they're doing it, and that's affected their credit rating. So, there's a bigger picture here. I hear stories constantly from sheriffs and deputies. Well, this happens in workers' comp, and they're not covered. We had another case in Mecklenburg, some of you may remember that. The deputy was answering a call, he was on duty, in his patrol car in uniform, a tree falls, just out of the blue, tree falls on his car and breaks his neck. And workers' comp wouldn't cover the helicopter ride for emergency to save his life. So it's a workers' comp issue too, and I don't know if this bill solved it, but it's a pretty big issue going on out there. Not only with sheriff's deputies, but I talked to Wayne. Troopers have had that in the past, and local government officers do too.
Mr. Chairman, John, I understand, but I still think this is a situation between the insurance provider and the department and the employee, and I don't understand how putting legislation in place to intervene is really the right, appropriate thing to do. I think this gets to a point where the sheriff and the county and the locality has to stand up for their employees to the workers' comp insurer. So, I understand the circumstances, I'm just not sure it's something that needs to be legislated though. Okay?
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, we're operating a motion if there is one. Not hearing a motion, Bill will adopt the motion. Thank you, sir, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the final bill of the morning.
Mr. Chairman, before we move forward, I'm not certain we moved the amendment on Delegate LaRock's bill. Do you all recall moving the amendment? It was a substitute.
My notes.
Oh, you had notes with you? Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize. Thank you.
Okay, there's at least one, maybe 2 full committees at 8:30, so the gavel will come down in about 15 or 18 minutes.
All right.
I'll give you
We'll give it
ample opportunity to
Great.
explain your bill.
Good morning. Good morning, there's a substitute.
Chairman, I'll move substitute.
Second.
A motion and a second, for substitute on the table, those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time this morning. The substitute, just so for people who understand what's going on in the audience, the substitute stripped out all of the other wars, all of the other monuments, except for Confederate monuments. So people know exactly what this bill is about. It's about local control over Confederate monuments. And you think about this, and all the time you all spent talking about local control in this subcommittee and this committee. We give localities the ability to control cutting of weeds, but we haven't yet given them the control over monuments that might have a detrimental effect on the atmosphere and the feeling of the community. So if you like local control, you ought to like this bill. It's very conservative. Local control is the whole thing about it. Now, interestingly enough, this statute has been on the books since 1902, and that's very significant because the protection of Confederate monuments popped into the code just at the time of Jim Crow. The statute has been amended over time, and the defacement language got into the code in 1988, at least the best we can determine. But this arrives in the context of Jim Crow. Not only that, Confederate monuments around the country were being created at about the time that the Confederate monuments in Charlottesville were erected in the 1910s and 1920s. This was at the height of the so-called Lost Cause celebration, celebrating the Confederate contributions in the Civil War. So let's put that in context. Now, if you weren't in Charlottesville on August of 2017, it would be hard to understand all of this. You need to watch the PBS documentary. It'll give you a sense of what this is about. People in Charlottesville and people around Virginia
want to have local control over things erected in public places, whether they want to contextualize them or not. So this bill simply gives them that local control. We have lots of people here to talk about it, and I want to give them a chance to speak about it, and then I'm willing to answer any questions about the bill.
Any questions of the patron? I just have, David.
I just wanted to clarify that the way that you've now substituted this, that the question about the local control of the monuments is specifically related to those surrounding the Civil War and not the other items that are covered in subsection A.
Absolutely. No other wars are involved. Revolutionary War, you know, World War II, Korean, Desert Storm, all of that is all stripped out of the bill. Localities, you don't have to leave those monuments as they are. It's just about Confederate monuments.
I do have one question. You made the comment that a lot of the memorials and monuments are concurrent with Jim Crow law. Weren't they also concurrent with the dying out of the veterans from the Civil War?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. I mean, if you read the stories about how these got erected, you have this situation where people are dying out, but you also have this very strong image of the so-called lost cause, that Virginia and the other southern states were heroic in their battles against the Union. And that is a story that has a lot of, you know, there's a lot of emotion around that. And for people in communities like Charlottesville and other places around the country who are trying to make sense of that part of our history, they reject this notion that this is a heroic battle, but instead take the position that this was an effort to destroy the Union. And clearly, that's what it was. If the Union had been destroyed, we'd have a country that looks very much different than we have today.
Very well, thank you. Okay, Delegate Thomas.
Question. On the substitute, you just stated that this would be for the removal of Confederate monuments only.
Well,
Not Union.
Because it says Union.
anything about the Civil War.
You
stated Confederate monuments only.
He's right.
Yeah, it's a Confederate
Couple
context,
votes,
yes.
right?
Yeah, that's the way that it's written.
All right, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give each side about 5 or 6 minutes. Those in favor of the bill, line up, please. Then any of you, you're gonna get about a minute apiece. Okay, you first, sir.
My name is Justin Greenlee. I live in the east end of Richmond, and I'm currently a student in the graduate program in Art and Architectural History at UVA. This is what we know about monuments in downtown Charlottesville, on Monument Avenue, and in public squares across Virginia. They are monuments to white supremacy. They were and continue to be attractive to those possessed of a hateful ideology. They peddle a false version of history, wherein slavery is denied as a cause of the Civil War. Their placement is calculated and contribute to enforced racial segregation known as Jim Crow. They replaced and were literally built on top of black neighborhoods. They mark certain spaces as white and presided over all kinds of racial violence, including grave robbing and lynching, and they continue to intimidate today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next.
My name is Matthew Christensen. I'm a resident of Albemarle County. I want to make a key note here. In September of 2015, Judge Martin Clark of Martinsville, Virginia, removed a painting of Jeb Stuart from his courtroom because he felt that it made a statement about whether or not, about the fairness and impartiality of a court. I note that one of the Confederate monuments in Albemarle County is positioned directly in front of the courthouse. I think this is an inappropriate position. I think if it was moved to a more appropriate place, that could be agreed upon. But you have to understand, in Charlottesville especially, these monuments stand for something dangerous, and we need to look at giving local control.
Thank you, sir. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and gentlemen. My name is Frank Creech, I'm a resident of Albemarle County. In Luxembourg, my mother's country of origin, you can go all over, every little hamlet has a memorial to American soldiers that died there. They're tended. very carefully by Luxembourg residents in World War II, that died in World War II there. My point is this, a statue that must be kept in place by law, by the powers of state, no longer really can be said to represent, if it ever did, the values of liberty and freedom and democracy. I served on the commission that Charlottesville City Council put together to determine the fate of the statues. We had 17 public meetings. It was voted on to move the statues by City Council, elected body. If you intend to vote against the bill, I do want to ask you this. Do you distrust Virginia people so much that you must dictate to every single community what they must keep in their visible squares in front of their courthouses? Do we distrust our democracy so much we cannot let the elected representatives make that determination for them?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming down this early, ma'am.
Hi,
You are who?
hi, my name is Lisa Drain. I'm a resident of Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay.
Lived there for about 19 years with my family. My husband's a physician at UVA, and I have 2 daughters. And I wanted to tell you a story about what happened to us on August 11th and 12th.
You have about a minute now.
Oh.
Summarize, please.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So, on August 11th, my daughter Rebecca, who was 23 at the time and a graduate of William & Mary, she and I went to the church for an ecumenical service right across the street from the rotunda. When we were allowed to leave, we saw across the street a line of fire snaking down around through the grounds. We went across and saw that there was a line of people carrying torches. We saw fire being thrown through the air. We realized the torches were being thrown and the fights were breaking out. We ran across the street because I feared that my younger daughter, Sophie, who was then 21 and getting ready to start her 4th year at UVA, I had feared that she might be there. In fact, she was. She was one of the students that had decided to surround the Thomas Jefferson statue, to hold the space, to hold their grounds, so that these.
We're familiar with what happened. You'd like to talk to the bill itself. I think that'd be more helpful.
Sorry. So the next day, we decided to protest the Unite the Right rally. We were down there and saw things being thrown. We saw the folks dressed in paramilitary garb with guns and shields and all kinds of weapons. I couldn't imagine that a statue had brought this to our town. We felt like we had to stand up. I'm from South Carolina. I grew up with the Confederacy. Our state capitol had the Confederate flag flying.
Yes, ma'am.
And that morning, when at about 1 o'clock that afternoon, we thought, after the police had declared the state of emergency, we thought things were over. I decided to go home. I live within about a mile of the downtown mall. A friend gave me a ride. Within 30 minutes, she called and said, "Please get back down here. Sophie's been hit by a car." In fact, Sophie, my daughter, the one who was getting ready to start her 4th year at UVA, was struck by the car driven by the white supremacist. She was nearly killed. We're thankful that she wasn't. She was badly injured, and I just want to say I have some images
Yes, ma'am.
here.
I take it you support the bill.
Yes, I
That's your
support the bill, and
For Charlottesville,
I ask you.
specifically, this
Ma'am,
is
you're not on
relevant
the
to
floor.
that.
Sorry,
Please,
so
let her talk.
I know
I
this
ask
is hard for you.
Yes, so at this point, I just ask, I want to say that my daughter could have been your daughter. My daughter could have been your son. I'm asking you to please let our locality choose what we want done with these statues. The statue is not worth this.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. Sir, can you have anything new? We'll cut off the pros in about 2 minutes.
All right.
In order to give equal time to the opposition.
I understand, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. I also was in Charlottesville on August. I was in the circle, but that's not important. I'm here to say that every statue is an unfunded mandate to the localities. They are required to pay the security bills every time a large Confederate group comes in and threatens the security of the town. And every locality should have the decision on whether they should keep it or not. It's something that everybody from outside has to deal with. and that's how I feel about this.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Don Gale, the city of Charlottesville. Please recognize the hatred that these statutes brought, that descended upon our fair city, that fateful weekend and continues. Please recognize that it led directly to the deaths of 2 state troopers that weekend and the murder of an activist. Please also recognize that if these statues truly are war memorials and dedicated to the war, why are they erected to one single individual, or in this case, 2 single individuals? Erect them to the entire conflict, and we are not about the destruction of the monuments. We are more concerned with the placement of where they are.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Hi,
You have
I'm-
something new to add?
Yes, I do.
Okay, quickly.
The chair mentioned the dying off of veterans at the time that these statutes were put in, and Delegate Toscano mentioned that this was at the time of the 1902 Virginia Constitution, which stripped away rights of African Americans to vote. I'm a historian. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia. The installation ceremonies for these monuments bemoaned Reconstruction government, and characterized freedmen as unworthy of citizenship. And yet this is standing in front of the courthouse, where we all go to get equal justice under the U.S. Constitution, and these statues represent people who tried to overthrow the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't make sense. And for us, contemporary communities attempting to chart a more racially inclusive future, current law forces us to keep these statues. It's like wrangling in a divorce proceeding against a bitter spouse that files counter motions to require us to keep wearing the wedding ring. Why should the state government tell a community what furniture to keep in our living room?
Thank you, ma'am. All right, I'm gonna cut off the testimony of those that are testifying for the bill in order to get close to the meeting time. Do you object to that?
These are 2 elected representatives.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
These folks are members of the Albemarle County Board.
Okay.
And the Charlottesville City Council, both of whom have executed resolutions in favor of this bill. I don't know if they're gonna say more than that, but that's what they're here to
Okay.
testify about.
Can you?
I'll be brief, Mr. Chair.
You understand, I have to give the other side.
I do
time
understand.
to-
This is
Okay.
important to our locality. This is about control and authority over our local physical spaces. Our constituents expect us to have this authority and control, and we believe we should be afforded the ability to have a thorough public policy debate, conversation, and public process with our constituents, be able to take votes, take action, and then be held accountable by our local constituents. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, members of the board. I'm Kathy Galvin. I'm a member of the Charlottesville City Council, and I represent my entire council. I am here speaking in support of House Bill 2377, and I'd just like to underscore a distinction, perhaps from all the other speakers, that this bill would provide clear authority for all localities, counties, cities, and towns. And I want to echo my colleague, Mr. Galloway, that this is a matter of local legislators' authority. And I appreciate your consideration. Please vote to report this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. For those who'd like to oppose the bill.
Yes, my name is Patrick Sweeney. I'm chairman of the Historic Monument Preservation Alliance, which is a coalition of other organizations. I'm also a member, been a board member of the James Monroe Memorial Foundation. I'm speaking on behalf of that board. Also been chairman in the past of the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission. This implication that local control is the only issue I think would be resisted in the Richmond community, because the region would be split apart. Indeed, City Council of Richmond was asked months ago to include this proposal in its legislative package and specifically declined. This bill would affect Richmond as well. One of the major points made in the 2 debates before Richmond City Council was Richmond did not want to be Charlottesville. We did not want to start dividing this region, and certainly the city itself. Unless the city of Richmond, which is obviously greatly affected by this, because one of the marquee debates has been about Monument Avenue, which is not the only debate. That has not yet been resolved. And I don't think it would be resolved in favor of taking those down, but simply giving the city that authority would be very divisive in this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I ask you not to report the bill.
My name is Ed Willis. I'm a local resident of Chesterfield, born here in Richmond, Virginia. I would ask that the bill be passed by indefinitely on the grounds that Article 4 Section 14 of the Virginia Constitution stipulates that the legislature cannot pass legislation herein the Constitution forbidden or restricted for the purposes of House Bill 2377. It's painfully clear that discrimination based on national origin, Confederate national origin, is the purpose for this bill. Specifically in Article 1, Section 11, the Virginia Constitution discrimination clause states that the General Assembly shall not pass any law that abridges the right to be free from any governmental discrimination on the basis of national origin. My great-great-grandmother was born during the war in 1863. Her husband was drafted by conscription, by act of the General Assembly, and ordered into battle by the Virginia General Assembly. He found under the rules of his conscription, he found a substitute. He could go home. He found a substitute, paid him a year's wage, went home, and then was drafted again, served throughout the rest of the war, and surrendered with his unit at Appomattox, where President Grant recognized the Confederate States as an official government, which
Yes, sir. Can you summarize now, please?
every delegate is sworn to uphold the Constitution in their oath,
Thank you, sir.
This clearly violates the oath as well as the General Assembly shall not enact any law that changes a existing law that affects ongoing judicial proceedings. That's in Article 4, Section 14. An existing lawsuit is ongoing in Charlottesville about this specific bill. And therefore, the
Thank you,
General
sir.
Assembly cannot vote on this bill.
Yes, sir.
Frank Ernest,
Excuse me.
Frank Ernest of Virginia Beach, Virginia. I'd like to clear up a couple of things that I've heard here today. I'll be brief. I was in Charlottesville on the 11th of August, 2017. And I was there being interviewed by Katie Couric at National Geographic. The reason they wanted to interview me there, I had suggested Richmond, is because they knew what was going to happen the next day. Like any right-thinking individual, I left Charlottesville the afternoon of the 11th, so I wouldn't be there on the 12th for what happened. What happened on the 12th, and I'm not the only one to say it, federal investigations have shown it was the improper actions of the city government of Charlottesville that brought about those events. And I resent what someone said earlier that there were Confederates there. There weren't. There were idiots there, but that was better. In Norfolk, where I was born, in front of what used to be the courthouse, is a statue of General MacArthur. One lone general in front of the courthouse. Does that send some kind of subliminal message? You know, they make it sound like, why is this soldier in front of the courthouse? Why is it just a general and not a group of soldiers? Well, there's Douglas MacArthur. It's not unusual. They're taking half-truths and using them their own way. Last year, it was the whole War Monuments Act. Now they've gotten smart and just zeroed in on that Confederate part. Just this week, Notre Dame put a tarp over a mural of Christopher Columbus. Take my word, just like in other socialist takeovers, it'll be Confederate statues today, but don't think they won't be back next year to expand it to another war, another time in history. In what arrogance do we think 400 years of Virginia history and American history that we know more than what the people who lived it did, and we can now all of a sudden rewrite it? I'm a Vietnam era veteran. Hey, we're rewriting history. Let's put Vietnam in the win column. Maybe I like that better that way.
Thank you, sir.
Trust me, it's not going to stop here. Thank you, sir. And I also would like to turn over to this committee over 2,000 signatures from around Virginia of registered voters who are in favor of leaving the law 15.2-1812 exactly as is.
I'll take it.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
my
you.
name is Raymond Deakins of Rappahannock County. I am also a Vietnam era veteran, and I'm part of a family that established residency in Virginia in 1650. My grandchildren are 15th generation Americans. I doubt very seriously if anybody in this room could even touch that. And I think as we have grown through 368 years of history, we do not, as a family, believe in sanitizing or altering our history. Let it be a point of discussion, let it be a point of debate, but do not support this bill in total opposition of the bill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And last?
Edmund Ray, Henrico County, west end of Richmond. The young man who spoke first in favor earlier illustrates one point I like to make about this issue, and it's those who disagree are suffering from the failed education system. That they've been misinformed about the history, and they believe that the monuments are causing these problems. It's not the monuments. It's in case of Charlottesville, August, their mishandling. It wasn't the monuments that caused the problem. It was the mishandling on the part of city government in Charlottesville.
Very well, thank you, sir. For the committee, I've been contacted by the DFW and I have a resolution. I won't read it. Well, I actually have two. One is a resolution opposing this legislation. The second one is a resolution to the federal level to establish federal law basically equivalent to Virginia law. So I'll just bring that to you.
Mr. Chairman, were those resolutions provided to you before the substitute was provided? Because I know that there was a lot of concern about the impact on other war memorials. I know that Delegate Toscano has now tried to make this much more concise.
Yeah, the resolutions affect all of them, not just the federal. Okay, very well. Well, we've had a healthy discussion.
Mr. Chairman, is there an opportunity to, do I get my last words? Quick.
Yes, sir, I will give you the last step.
It's just about who's gonna control public spaces, and it doesn't require the removal of any monuments. Bedford or whatever, Franklin County, if folks wanna keep monuments there, they can do it. It just gives the locality the ability to control the public spaces. Thank you.
Okay, Drew?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to report the substitute.
Second. We have a motion and a second to report the substitute. Very well, we'll vote on the bill. Delegate Toscano.
Thank you.
Your bill fails to receive 5-2, but I want to thank everybody that came and testified this morning. That was very good flex. Committee shall rise up to all do.
Come over to my office. If you wanna come over to my office, we can be very.
You wanna try and, you can ask them to
Alright, so I have to likely visit in Virginia since
I didn't realize Republicans were for strong central government.
I'm down here.
Take care.
I was Charlottesville in August. I knew you were in the park. I just saw some photos of it.
Thank you all very much. And the language
Put the glass open.
church, I was that year, I had been adopted.
They started in Little Marlboro.